Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Whatever time it is for you, we wish to extend you all a warm welcome as we embark upon the next hour together as part of our webinar series on communicating across cultures. My name is Angela Cunningham, and I am Director of Products at Toastmasters International. And as you take your seats and settle in, get comfortable, I'll share just a few words on housekeeping. Please note that whilst you can see us, we cannot see you, but we do still want to hear from you. We ask that if you have any questions for our distinguished panel today, simply submit them through the Q&A feature on your screen. We have set aside 15 minutes at the end where we'll get through as many of your questions as we can. The webinar is being recorded and you'll have access to it in a few days when we will send you a link to the recording via the email you use when registering for this session. The chat feature is open, so feel free to chat with each other during the webinar, but please remember to be courteous to your fellow attendees. And now, let me introduce our moderator for today, Dilip Abhisakara. Hi, Dilip. Dilip grew up in Sri Lanka and moved to the United States for his higher education. After earning a PhD in chemistry, he worked for 12 years as an industrial scientist, during which time he joined Toastmasters and discovered he had a talent for public speaking and training. He was twice a finalist in the Toastmasters World Championship of Public Speaking Contest, and he has served as Toastmasters International President, which is the highest leadership role in the organization. Along the way, Dilip founded a speech coaching and training business that brought him in front of international audiences. He also has enjoyed a career as a college professor, teaching subjects related to communication and world religions. Encountering a call to ministry, he earned a Master of Divinity degree and now serves as a full-time pastor of a church in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Dilip, for being with us here today. Over to you.
Thank you, Angela. And hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you and with our international panel of experts. Let me introduce them. I'm excited to introduce Christian Hofeler. Christian is a cultural coach, trainer, and mentor for multinational organizations, or rather for people who work globally. Based in Atlanta, he is German by passport, American by choice, and Bavarian at heart. People call him the culture guy. His passion is to help people discover commonality when they are overwhelmed by difference. His mission is to create peace by facilitating understanding, relating, and connecting. At the core of this purpose is culture. And as he helps people figure out this thing called culture, he believes they work at their peak and in peace with others. With his company, The Culture Mastery, Christian and his team help multinational organizations all over the world achieve their goals in global markets. The second expert with us today is Rashmi Kapsi. Rashmi is the founder and CEO of Apt Culture, an organization that provides cultural consulting for companies venturing into the Asian market and for Asian organizations making acquisitions in the United States and Canada. She coaches executives around the globe to lead effectively. She moved to the US in 1998 after receiving her PhD from the University of Mumbai. She has lived and worked in India and Europe. She conducts intercultural coaching for teams that work virtually with international colleagues, as well as conducts performance coaching for teams that work within the US. Rashmi serves on the board of directors at Society for Intercultural Education, Training, and Research in the US. She's a mentor for AISEA, an organization that helps early-stage tech-enabled social enterprises in the sectors of healthcare, education, and agriculture. Let's get to it and start discovering cultural differences in humor and nonverbal communication with our panelists, Christian and Rashmi. I'll direct this first question to you, Christian. Describe what cross-cultural communication means to you and how your work and career fits into the topic.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being on here. Thank you, Dilip, for inviting me. And Rashmi, nice to see you again. This is a big honor for me to be here with you today. So I'm very excited about this. What does cross-cultural communication mean to me? It means to me, it sounds big, it means to me everything, because ever since I've been a teenager, I was prompted to communicate across cultural divides or gaps. And had I not figured out how to master it for myself, I would have had no friends. So it was basically a very selfish means to an end in the beginning, to be seen, be heard, be recognized. And now that I do this professionally, it's become my life's work, because I come from a culture, you said it nicely in the introduction that I paid you to say those nice things about me. I come from a culture that is not necessarily known by our history as being very understanding of other cultures. I come from Germany, a country with a very dark patch in our history and still very recent memory. So for me, it's also a psychological means to come to terms with my country's history and help other people to overcome misconceptions that they may or may not have about, quote unquote, the others. So it means quite a bit to me. It's more than a profession. It's more a mission and a passion.
Thank you, Christian. Wow. That really means a lot, the way you described the personal impact it has on you. Rashmi, I'm sure you have your own story. So how does that affect you, this cross-cultural communication and what it means to you?
Sure. First, let me thank you, Dilip, for having me here. It's an honor to be here. And thanks, Christian, for being my partner again on this chat. For me, cross-cultural communication has, it's not just opening up your mind to other cultures, but it's opening your heart to where the conversation is headed. It's a lot of humility in how we approach things. It's asking lots of questions to get clarity, and assuming that there is no malice from anyone across the world who are communicating with us, because sometimes the behaviors that come across us might seem malicious, but if we hold on to that, then we would never be able to communicate effectively with others. So understanding that we all want to communicate well with each other, that's what I think of as cross-cultural communication.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask both of you to think about this. We are talking about culture, and different people may have different impressions of what culture is. But culture is really a very broad term, isn't it? Christian, can you give us kind of an idea of what we mean by culture? It means so many different things, but they are all together in some way.
Well, we could easily say culture is the arts, it's literature, it's music, it's food. To me, culture is everything. It informs how we show up as human beings. It's how we interact with the world in which we live. It's how we talk, how we listen, how we feel, how we process information, how we think, what we believe in. All of that is our culture, and it shapes everything we do. So it's easy to belittle culture and put it into the basket of, well, that's the arts or that's the cultural thing. And often people ask me, or when clients come to us to ask about how we work with them, they bring up a term that I almost have a visceral reaction to now. They bring up the term, oh, you do soft skills work. And nothing could be further from the truth, if you ask me, because if the ability to efficiently communicate and relate and inspire and lead others across the globe, that's not a soft skill. That is a hard, critical, mission critical, bottom line relevant skills. I don't know why people would like to call it a soft skill. To me, that's a very, very hard heart currency, a very important skill. So for me, culture is everything.
Yes. And when we are born into a family in a certain culture, we start inculcating the values, what's important, the myths of that culture, and so forth. And so here's where culture and communication come together. Like Rashmi, you've seen this, what is this culture communication link? How does that work?
Okay. Coming from a culture that is so diverse, India has so many different states, so many different languages, so many different kinds of foods, clothing. So there is so much diversity within that culture. Um, we as children growing up, I grew up in Mumbai, that's a cosmopolitan city in India, and trying to find that link between how to communicate from one culture to another within the same India as the bigger culture, if you will. It was challenging, but we learned to do that. We learned different languages as children, our neighbors' languages. We learned to eat somebody else's food, appreciate it, and be open to all of that. And I think communicating with those other cultures, moving to the UK, communicating very differently, what was expected of me was very different in India and very different in the US and very different in Europe. How you carry yourself, how you speak with others, how you open a conversation. All of that is so different in these different cultures. So I think it was amazing to learn what are the things you need to do culturally and how well you communicate within all of these different cultures.
Yes.
Big learning.
Absolutely. I've read that culture and communication cannot be separated. They are together. The things that we learn and absorb from our family, and as we grow up, as we go to school, as we play, we learn what's considered important there and what it takes to be accepted within that group. Yeah. And then to our surprise, we find that even within the same country, as you were indicating, Rashmi, when you move from one place to another, you are moving towards new cultures. Yeah. I lived 20 years in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And then 3 years ago, I moved up to Sunbury, just an hour and a half away. But the culture is very different here. So I learned that, intercultural communication does not require you to move to another country. You can just meet people where you are or just a little further away and discover that, oh, yes, this communication is very important because that's how we stay in touch. But the way I learn to communicate might have to be modified in order for me to connect with the people that I'm meeting now.
You know, you bring up an interesting point here, Dilip, because it's easy to assume from the outside, well, the Indian subcontinent with its 1.3, 1.4 billion people and a large geography, of course, there will be regional differences. And that's, I think anyone who's never been to India would still be able to comprehend that at a certain level. But what you just said about the state of Pennsylvania, that even within an hour and a half driving, you're still in the same state, you still have the same license plate on the back of your car, you find different behaviors. That's why in the introduction you gave about me, I always say I'm German by passport and Bavarian by heart, because Bavaria is the part of Germany, it's the southeastern part of Germany, a small country just by geographical size. I guess it's the size of half of the size of the state of Montana or something like that. It's a small country with 82, 83 million people. And even within the small country like Germany, my behaviors, my culture is significantly different from that of the northern part of Germany. And if you have never been to a language area, let's put it that way, to the area of German speakers or the area of French speakers, Russian speakers, Portuguese speakers, no matter which one you pick, you won't be aware of how there's differences within that linguistic zone, within the political borders or within that cultural zone. So culture is so much more nuanced than just national culture. And that's something people sometimes forget.
Thank you for sharing that, Christian. Yes.
I think even as cross-cultural consultants, trainers, coaches, I think it's hard for us sometimes to, get the sense and feel of how to communicate with a different culture. I'll give you a very funny story. Um, I was doing these training programs for a few Japanese companies. This was 15, 18 years back. And these companies would send people, around 20, 25 people for these trainings. And we would have straight 5 or 6 days of cultural training. And the cultural training was about how to work with the US and how to work with India. These were the two parts that I was managing. And I started with this group of people, 20, 25 people. And the first 2 days passed by and they were just not, they were not very interactive. And I'm not a person who just keeps talking in the class in a training format. I'm more of a facilitator. I like others talking and getting engaged. So I was getting really nervous and that, maybe they aren't following things. And I spoke with a couple people and I realized that maybe they don't speak English as much. And that is the issue. So I started speaking slower and I started repeating myself. And I felt that they were losing interest. So after a couple of days, and I made it a point to have lunch with them, go for coffee with them. And after a couple of days were done, one of the person who was kind of getting really friendly with me, she came up to me and she said, "Sensei, can I tell you one thing? You won't mind?" I was, please, how do you think the class is going? She says, "What you're teaching us right now, we've learned that like at least 6 years back. We know everything you're telling us." And I am thinking, why would you not tell me that? I told you what I was going to teach. You have the curriculum with you. Why would you not let me know? And she said, "No, because when you started teaching and you started repeating, we thought it was not a good thing to let our sensei know that she's wrong." And so that politeness of not offending me was really not helping them, not serving them. So the next day when I went into the class, I apologized for not asking them, not checking with them. And I slowly realized to give more eye contact, to get a feel of what's going on in class and asking them lots of questions and what should I do next? And even if they didn't want to answer, I would choose a few people who were kind of giving me some eye contact and go ahead with it. So even intercultural trainers can really mess up.
Right, right. Yeah, we all do. And you brought up aspects of nonverbal language, nonverbal communication, and how you began to use that to really connect and understand them. And since today's seminar is about humor and body language, let's look at that body language aspect. We are used to thinking of communication as language, but language has many components, and two major components are the verbal part, words, and then the nonverbal messages given without words, right? So let me ask you, Christian, how does body language, hand gestures, and so forth add meaning to messages? And you probably have examples of how cultural differences affect the way body language is perceived. Can you share that?
Well, first of all, I think there's 3 major components to how we create a message. There is the words that we use, whether we utter them or whether we write them. So the word base is one part of our language or the message making. Then if we say them out loud, it's the tonality of our voice, the timbre, the speed at which I talk, the pitch, or whether I have a low voice. So all of that carries meaning. And then the third part is the nonverbal cues, the body language, how I posture myself, whether I smile, whether I say it, or if I have a frowny face when I say it, if I look at you directly, or if I look down at my feet while I talk to you. All of these carry meaning, or these add to the meaning making, right? So There's a famous psychologist by the name of Albert Morabian. Feel free to look him up. He created he's known for the Morabian model, and he gives percentages to how much of our message making is the word base and the tonality and the body language. And it's a whole science about that. And I don't want to get too deep into that. But what Pellegrino Riccardi said on the session yesterday, and if you haven't watched that, watch the recording because it was great. There is what he calls what's comfortable and what is known. So there's the known zone and the comfort zone. So there are behaviors, body language behaviors that are known to us within our culture. And then there are behaviors that are unknown or unfamiliar or uncomfortable to us. So sometimes simple gestures within one culture work very well. We don't have to translate them. We don't have to explain ourselves when we do a thumbs up in North America. In other cultures, that can be perceived as offensive depending on the context. I hope our viewers from Greece who are watching this will not be offended if I do this right now. In most countries in the world, this means stop. Please do not do this any longer, or stop your vehicle. In Greece and Greek culture, that has a very obscene and derogatory meaning that I don't want to explain here, but you will find out. You can Google this. There's apps about this. There's websites devoted to all of these hand gestures, body postures, or facial features that carry a different meaning depending on which cultural context you're in, right? So Dilip, you come from the Indian subcontinent. Rashmi, you come from there as well. I'm sure you can tell some stories about Indian subcontinent specific body language features that don't travel well around the globe, right?
Absolutely. Rashmi was chatting a little bit earlier about it. Rashmi, tell us what you were telling us about how people can be confused with the way people in India and Sri Lanka use their heads and so forth. Go ahead and elaborate on that.
So head wobble is something that people will always ask me about. So what does this mean? And I will ask them, what was the speed of when someone did this to you? What was the speed of that? What was the angle at which they did that? There are so many different meanings that you can get from a head wobble. But the most important one, or the one that is mostly used, is I hear you. I'm paying attention, and it's just like, okay, I'm listening to you. Most of the cultures, for the Americans, it's really confusing when Indians do this, because is it a yes? Is it a no? Is it a maybe? What is it? And sometimes a yes can be this, but sometimes a yes can be this as well. So again, ask questions if you don't understand. But most of the times people use their head a lot in India. It's more to pay respect to you, that I'm listening to you, I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you, and I'm paying attention. It's just their way of saying.
Right. And there are variations to that. In Sri Lanka, where I'm from, where I grew up, moving the head like this, a slow waggle like that, means, yeah, in general, I agree with you. But also, when we disagree, we can shake our head like that. Notice the speed is different. And when we agree, we can certainly do that. But always pay attention to the context is what I've found out. Right. And then if you don't know, just ask.
Yeah. One of the things that Christian mentioned was the tonality of the voice, right? In more direct cultures, you're paying so much attention to the tonality of voice. But in indirect cultures, when people avoid speaking, when they avoid saying a no, and even for the no, when they say a yes, observing this body language, or how are they saying the yes? Is the yes coming, oh yeah, sure. Is that like that? Or is it, yeah, sure. All that makes a huge difference in what it means.
Exactly. There are countries that have cultures, some which are called collectivist, and then some are individualist, right? Collectivist cultures are very, very much aware of the context, the background.
Absolutely.
And that is part of the communication. What have you, in your many training activities, what have you observed about how those affect the body language that is being used, so that a United States person may not understand what a Thai person is saying, because they are totally different in the way they approach the context, the background, and what Rashmi said earlier about that sense of respect they have for people who are supposedly in charge. Can you share a little bit of what you've seen about how all that background affects the body language?
Mm. Are you asking me?
Yeah, yeah.
I think when we look at the duopoly that you hinted at, collectivist cultures and more independent cultures, often also called independent and interdependent cultures. The US is arguably probably the most independent culture that we in our field know of. Most Anglo-Saxon cultures tend to fall heavily on the independent side, and many Latin cultures, sub-Saharan African and Asian cultures fall into the more collectivist or group-oriented basket. And I think independent cultures sometimes struggle with having fine-tuned antennas for that which is not said. Collectivist cultures often communicate in a more indirect, high context manner, and the individualist is not used to that. It's unknown, uncomfortable to them. And so their cultural DNA, their wiring, their education tells them, say it as you mean it, spell everything out, leave nothing to be guessed. Don't give people an opportunity to read between the lines. What you see is what you get. Be straightforward. Be impeccable with your words, so to say. And when you come to a situation, to a conversation with that mindset, not always do you have fine-tuned antennas that are able to pick up silence or pauses, or like Rashmi displayed for us, they don't know how to deal with it. Yes, yeah, maybe. So independent cultures are not always well trained in recognizing these behavioral patterns. On the contrary, collectivist cultures tend to be quite off-put or feel a level of aggressiveness coming from independents who say, well, this is how it is and this is how I see it, and I statements, not we statement, I think this is that way. And for a collectivist person, that is almost like a breach of trust or a breach of personal space, and how dare you make your point of view more important than the group's. So there's many levels how miscommunication could happen on the verbal side and on the nonverbal cues, because if you communicate as a direct individualist, sometimes your posture explains that too. So chest is out and your shoulders are back, and maybe you punctuate your sentence with hand gestures, or you wave it around in the air like I do, or you raise your voice because you're trained that this is okay, that's a rewarded behavior. Whereas in a collectivist society, you probably wouldn't do that because it would be breaking the group's rules, right? Those are many levels.
Yes, absolutely right. When I was in graduate school, we had a Japanese postdoc. And that's the first time I really met and interacted with a Japanese person. And when we had discussions and we would ask his opinion about something, sometimes he would say, maybe. And I wasn't quite sure how to take that. Is that a yes or no or what? But he would not say directly no, that's the bad idea, because he comes from the collectivistic culture. And he was respectfully hinting to us that he wasn't very enthusiastic about it, but I didn't pick up on it until later. As I learned to know him, then I understood I must pay attention not only to what he says, but the way he says it and the body language that accompanies it.
Yeah.
You've probably seen this, Rashmi, in many of your interactions.
Absolutely. So it's just when people, even nowadays, when people are interacting more and more virtually, it's getting harder. Even though we have Zoom and we have other media outlets with which we communicate, it's harder because you can't see the face of the person. Sometimes you don't meet them, you've not developed a relationship with them. And so really understanding whether it's a yes or a no can be very challenging.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. And I found that one of the best things to do is just to ask, can you tell me? I'm curious. And then people will tell you, but we tend to want to guess and make up a story in our minds about what that means.
Sometimes asking also doesn't help, because let's say you were asking me, oh, would you finish this by Friday, the work? And I'm from India, and you're my senior, you're my boss. I don't want to say a no. I can say, yeah, sure. Actually, we have a festival on Friday. That's your clue. If you don't get it, too bad. If you get it, good.
Well, and the mistake that the person made is they asked a question that leads to a yes or no answer, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I found was ask them what it means. Instead of saying, is that a yes or no? Just say, I'm trying to understand what you really mean. Educate me, please. Right.
I think I want to refer back to what Pellegrino said yesterday. No question, because I often get this question from clients: is there anything that is taboo that I cannot bring up in a question? Sure, there are, depending on the cultural context. Sometimes there will be things that you probably don't want to touch right away. But what Pellegrino said yesterday, and I'm a true believer of that as well. No question is off limits if it comes from a place of genuine curiosity. If your voice, your body language, your tonality, and the words that you choose signal to your vis-a-vis, to your counterpart, that you're genuinely curious about them, that they matter to you, then a question will be well received. If a question, however, comes off with a hint of judgment or condescension or patronization, then the question may not work as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that, but just wanted to add a couple things to that. Was in some Asian cultures, when very direct cultures are speaking with them, even though there is no malice and they don't want to be condescending, that directness comes across as be very overpowering, and that might be perceived as condescending.
Right.
So that might not be the intent, but say, so I don't think I want to join you for lunch. I don't have time. That might be just a basic statement, which means I don't have time, so I won't be joining you for lunch. But if someone has from Germany or someone from the US is in India and the group is inviting them for lunch with them, and that's how they say it, chances of you building relationship have minimized to this much.
Yes. That was the last invitation you got.
Yes, that is probably the last one.
Right.
I've just remembered something, because you asked it earlier, body language, how did that show up? But the first interaction I had with Argentinians, I had read about it. My mind knew it. So here's a clue how we cross-cultural quote unquote experts or specialists often get it wrong ourselves. So I knew that in Argentina, the distance between people tends to be very small. And this was pre-COVID Corona time. So, but in general, a conversation between Argentinians happens at a very close physical distance. So they get very close to you by US standards, where you would like have a 3 feet distance from you, that safety personal bubble around you. For most North Americans, that is very uncomfortable. I come from Germany. I've dealt with Mediterranean cultures most of my life, so it didn't bother me as much, but it still stood out to me because this gentleman got really, really close to me. I mean, I could smell his breath on me. Not that it smelled bad, but it was like, wow, what's going on? Why is he getting so close? And then it dawned on me, oh, Argentinian. So I did an experiment. So I took a step back and wanted to see what's going to happen in the conversation. And sure enough, he kept following me because widening the distance from him, for him, that meant, well, he's leaving my circle of trust. I need to get closer again. So he kept following me through the room. And I was like, wow, this is such a deeply ingrained behavior that the gentleman probably wasn't aware of it himself. That's just his quote unquote normal. That's how he was raised. This is how his body language is so deeply ingrained in his behavior.
That's right, Christian. Yeah, we're talking about personal space.
Yeah.
And personal space means different things to different cultures. I just read some time ago about how in the Middle East, personal space, when Arabs talk with each other, they are much closer than they are in the US.
Mhm.
And it just varies by culture. But one of the things that also varies is humor, since we want to address that. And when I chatted with you, Christian, on the phone some days ago, you talked about how in Germany, you were not encouraged to smile too often, and how smiles can be misinterpreted.
Mm.
Can you tell us a little bit about that how that culture looks at it?
Well, some of you may have heard this before, and I'm introducing it to you again. There's that old comparison between peaches and coconuts, and we overuse it sometimes in our work. So Germans tend to fall in the coconut category, which means they're kind of rough on the outside and not really pretty to look at, and they're hard to the touch, and they're fibrous, and it really takes a lot of time to get into them, and effort and patience. But once you're inside, there's the goodness. There's the coconut meat, there's the coconut water, and no more resistance, right? And the peach is bright and red, orangey on the outside, fuzzy, soft to the touch, easy to sink your teeth into, juicy, sweet, everything. All the goodness is there until your teeth hit the hard pit on the inside, right? So Germans, Central and Eastern Europeans tend to fall on that coconut side, where outward emotional expression is not encouraged or not rewarded in our culture. We only smile if we have close rapport with somebody, if we're in somebody's coconut, so to say, if we know we can trust that person. But to a complete stranger, if I walk down the street in Germany, I would probably greet them politely, but not overly exaltive. Right here in the US, people wave at each other and smile and how you doing, and I was taken aback for the first time I came to the United States. How are you doing? How's it going? I'm like, why is everybody friendly to me? They don't know me. They don't know what my intentions are. So that was really off-putting at first. So that's how I learned to adjust my friendliness levels and my smile level. So don't take that as Rashmi said earlier, there's always a positive intention behind that behavior. Just because people don't smile at you doesn't mean they don't like you. They may just have a different way to show appreciation or rapport.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Rashmi, I want to direct this to you because I was just thinking as Christian was talking about smiling and effusive behavior, we are used to a certain standard of customer service in the United States. People who wait on us are supposed to be friendly, to smile, to greet us warmly. But when I go to an Indian restaurant, I find that the Indian waiters don't do that. They are reserved compared to the US standard, reserved. They rarely smile, but they're attentive. But that reservation can be misunderstood as being aloof, but that's not necessarily so. Can you enlighten us on that?
Sure. So smile, I think, as Christian put it very well, that it's very different. The perception of what a smile is and what it means is so very different in different cultures. India is a very hierarchical culture. So as children, so I grew up in a very different family, but most kids were told that you can't give eye contact to your adults when you're talking. When your dad is angry at you, you shouldn't stare into his eyes. If that's something that you American child did when the parents were getting angry, like, look into my eyes, I'm talking to you. So these are two very different things. Let's take the point you were mentioning, smile. Smile, when I first got married and we were taking pictures, I would ask my mother-in-law, why isn't she smiling completely with her teeth and all? And she would say, don't show your teeth. Don't show your teeth. And the way I smile is I show my teeth. And as I researched more and more into it, that a lot of cultures, showing your teeth is showing animosity. And so smiling less is the way to respect you. I don't want to smile at you. I don't want to giggle at you because you have a better hierarchy than I have right now. And so I'm going to be respectful and I'm going to be attentive and attend to you but not be overly friendly.
Yes.
Does this mean, Rashmi, that if you're in a hierarchical context where you know your place, so to say, and a situation is funny, because we're also talking about humor here, that you suppress your laughter or that you don't allow yourself to show that you're being amused?
Oh, absolutely. For years together, and I grew up looking at women, people who were working for our family or people who were working in the fields would laugh with covering their mouth. So, or their dupattas, or so it was a common thing to not show your laughter, because then that's not respectful. Your position, a woman's position, was not supposed to be with all the leaders in the room or with the family patriarch in the room. So you kind of manage your laughter. So you can smile and you can laugh, but that limit has to be followed.
Right. In hierarchical cultures, that's what I was in Sri Lanka. People are expected to know their place and show their respect to those in so-called higher positions. And so they don't express themselves that much. They don't make eye contact that much. And this is difficult for, I think, Americans to understand, because when I came to America, I loved the sense of equality I felt. When I went to church, the local postman was attending. And I remember thinking, in Sri Lanka, the local postman would be going to a different service, not the service I was in. You see? So it's very different. And we can make the mistake of making up stories in our head about why a person behaves in a certain way when we don't really know what their story is. Right. So let's talk about humor. How does humor work in intercultural communication? Can that help? Can that hurt? And how do we traverse that region when we don't really know the cultural background, but we are trying to use humor in communication?
I think humor anywhere needs a context. Yes. If you understand the context, you can use humor in the best way possible to connect with people, to make friends, to be impressive in a gathering. You can use humor in so many different ways. Just to give you a really quick example on how humor can be different even within my own house. I have boys that are young adults, and their humor, when they look at memes and they're giggling away and laughing, I want to be part of that. When I try to see it, I have no clue why they're laughing, because those memes don't make sense to me. Right. Whereas some of the jokes that my husband and I can really enjoy and laugh at, they call boomer humor. So humor has been changing over generations. Humor is different, not just regionally and culturally, but even generationally. So humor can be used effectively if you understand the context, but without a context, humor is meaningless.
That's beautiful, Rashmi, because that's what often lets humor bomb across cultures. And you have no idea how many times I stepped into that disaster area that I thought I was hilarious. I was like slapping my thigh how funny I was, and crickets in the room, because I didn't get the context. Humor evolves quickly too in our times with pop cultural context, which doesn't always pass generations, right? Or George Bernard Shaw, Irish playwright, famously known for saying the problem with communication is the assumption that it happened. And he also said that the UK and the US are two countries separated by a common language. So here's an example. Watch the TV show called The Office. It originated in Great Britain. So there is the Ricky Gervais British version of The Office, and then there is the American version of The Office called with Steve Carell as the main character. I also know that there is a German spin-off of it. They didn't call it The Office. They gave it a different title, but the same plot. Three completely different approaches to how that situational humor will be funny. In the UK, it's much more insinuative humor, really around three-corner sarcasm and irony. In the US, it's laugh out loud, in your face fun. Same language, different kind of humor. So it's really thin ice. If you're presenting in the Toastmasters context, if you're presenting in front of an audience and you don't know the composition of the room and you don't know the cultural context, humor is a very double-edged sword. So I'd rather err on the safe side there.
Absolutely. Many of our listeners today are Toastmasters, and many of them, if they're not Toastmasters, they've been to clubs. We have a speech contest called the International Speech Contest. I've had the pleasure of coaching many of the speakers for these contests, and a big stumbling block is humor, because sometimes they are wondering why they can't use a certain piece of humor, because all their friends at home laughed. When they gave it at their home club, they laughed. They loved it. And then they come to a larger audience, which has many cultures in that audience. And so your caution is well taken. Test that out. And it's good to make people smile and laugh, but don't insult them, or make sure you tested that out so that your humor works for you and not against you. Any words from you, Rashmi, as we are about to finish on humor, body language, that you'd like to add?
No, I think I'm good. I know Angela is waiting for us for questions. So we'll answer the questions, and then if we have some more time, we can.
Right. Okay, Angela, return control back to you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much, panelists. What a great discussion, just filled with a wealth of information and insights. Let's get into our Q&As. We have some great questions from our attendees today. Thank you so much, attendees, for submitting. The first question is from Mariana to Dilip. Dilip, have you found something in common to make all cultures laugh?
What I found in common is to use the element of, a humor. A piece of humor is usually defined as people think you're going one way and then you suddenly veer to another side. For example, at the World Championship speech in 1992 that I gave, I talked about a piece of advice that I had got about opening up to people. And I said something like, the man who is selfish is like a piece of paper crammed into a cookie. But the man who is generous is one who opens his arm and opens up that cookie. Now, I didn't say that exactly, but this is my memory of it. And then I paused and I said, you might think that Confucius said that. Actually, I found that inside a fortune cookie. And then people laughed. And that was an international audience. And that was the biggest laugh I got, because it referred to something very human and not culturally centered. So what I found is, find something that is not an inside joke. An inside joke is, oh, you got to understand the culture to appreciate that joke. But something that's just based on our humanity, those are the ways that we can make people laugh most of the time, regardless of culture. And again, I also say most of the time, because it's a sensitive area we have to pay attention to and choose carefully.
If I may just add a 30-second here,
Please.
That is a beautiful display of humor, Dilla, because it does not belittle anyone. It does not make fun or mock anybody. It is not necessarily self-deprecating, which tends to work often, but not always, because some cultures view self-deprecation as a weakness. So your form of humor that you just displayed is most likely the safest. Too often humor is at the expense of others, and outside of a common context, that rarely works.
I think making yourself more vulnerable makes it easier to conduct humor. Mr. Bean is a very good example of that. I think people all over the world most of them at least like him. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks for that. Rashmi, I have a question here. Let's start off with you, if we may. This question comes in from Samantha. In the US, I often start a speech with a joke. Is that appropriate in other countries? Samantha asks.
If they understand your joke, then that's good. If they don't understand it, then that might be a problem, because I think humor can be used, like Christian said, it's a double-edged sword. In a UK, when to relieve tense situations, you can use humor, and people will be appreciative of that. I lived in the UK before moving to the US, and when I tried to do that in the US, people were looking at me like, what are you, crazy? We are really struggling on the deadlines here and you're trying to make a joke. So it doesn't necessarily work. So you have to get a feel for your audience and then go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I answered your question. I don't know if I confused you even more.
Christian Dillip, did you want to add anything to that?
No, absolutely. I agree. Tread cautiously. And the more you know your audience or the cultures that are represented, the better your chance of connecting with them. For a speaker, I would say, get to know your audience as much as possible. That's why professional speakers actually make the effort to be there at a meeting early, mix and mingle and talk with people and find out what makes them chuckle, you see, and so you get a feel for that audience. Then when you get up to speak, you are already a known quantity and people feel more comfortable with you. Like Mr. Bean, people, even though many different cultures look at him, but they see that sense of self-deprecating humor he brings. So get to know your audience.
Thank you. Thanks, Dillip. A question here, Christian. Let's come to you. A question from Earl. For some cultures, is there ever a problem with too much body language and too many gestures?
I tend to say yes. There are some cultures who view that as a distraction. So coconutty cultures, to come back to that metaphor, tend to be less expressive in the way they communicate, and they find overly expressive communication as irritating because they think it distracts from the actual word base, from the messaging. So Mediterranean cultures tend to be very emotionally expressive. Arabic cultures, Latin cultures tend to be more emotionally expressive in how they deliver a message. Nordic cultures, Eastern European, Slavic cultures, Germanic cultures, not so much. So when there's too much body language and too much fidgeting around, a representative of a more emotionally restrained culture will view that as either inauthentic or incompetent, or maybe there's a hidden agenda that I cannot figure out, and why are they doing this all the time? What is all this supposed to mean? And so that can be a distraction. So I think a good advice would be to at least read up, study some when you know that you are going to interact with somebody from a culture that is distinctly different from your own, and find out what might be the best course of action, or ideally call Rashmi. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you, Christian.
Yes, by the way, that was my German attempt at being funny.
It was good. It worked. Dillip, you touched on this beforehand. How do you prepare beforehand to learn about culture and body language before interacting with an unknown culture, or a culture perhaps that you're not familiar with?
Right. Well, because I do a lot of speaking, professional speaking, seminars, webinars, I consider part of my preparation is audience analysis. I actually have what is called a pre-programmed questionnaire that I send to the organizer. And that has a lot of questions about the audience so that I can get a feel for who they are, what they are desiring from this presentation, what would make them very happy, what might make them uncomfortable. So I ask all these questions. What I found was that when I send this questionnaire, sometimes people don't send it back. So if I found a better way of filling that out, That is, I email it to that organizer. Then I say, I'll be giving you a call to go over this. What's a good day and time? Then I call. While we're on the telephone, I ask the questions and I fill it in, because I can hear there, as Christian said, there's verbal, there's vocal, and visual. I can't see the visual if I'm on the phone, but I can get the verbal and the vocal. And that tells me about, oh, this is really important for them. This is what would make this special. This is something they don't want me to bring up because it's a sore point, all that. And that allows me to then shape the content and the delivery of that presentation. They feel that, boy, this person customized their message, right? Good presenters make the audience feel that they've received a message just for them. And so do the work, do the homework. That's part of what we learn in Toastmasters, and especially as you get out in the professional speaking arena, that your message must be customized to make it relevant and acceptable to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our time is fast going, so I'm going to ask this question, and perhaps we could all chip in, but Rashmi, I'll give you the floor first of all. Does a sustained eye contact mean something different from country to country? And that question comes from Sandra. Rashmi, why don't you kick us off with that one, please?
Thanks for that excellent question, Sandra. Absolutely. Eye contact is very different for different people around the world. A strong eye contact, because of that hierarchy that I was talking to you in India, could be perceived as hostile. Whereas in the US, it's that you're being truthful. But if someone does not give eye contact, someone from Asian cultures does not give good eye contact, does not necessarily mean that they're not being truthful or they're being, they're trying to hide something from you. It just means that they want to show their respect, or they are shy, or so many other things. So eye contact could be a good thing in most cultures. In Asian cultures have started understanding that Western cultures do like eye contact. So the younger generations, you will see them giving eye contact, but the older generation, you will see that they shy away from giving eye contact. Even in a meeting, if you're kind of holding someone's gaze for a long time, they will look away because they are getting uncomfortable. So yeah, that's it. I know we have less
great.
time.
Thank you. We have just enough time for Christian, maybe a minute with you, and Dilip, perhaps a minute with you. Christian.
I want to echo what Rashmi said. I don't want to take too much time on this. I do want to caution those of you who value eye contact to view people who avoid eye contact as being evasive. Remember, every behavior has a positive intention. And fine-tune your antennas. If people avoid your gaze, then maybe they are uncomfortable with your stare. So if you make people uncomfortable, the messaging will suffer. You will not get the rapport you need in order to work harmoniously together. So there's no right or wrong. Cultures are not right or wrong. Cultures are. And the more you understand the reason why they are the way they are, the easier it will be to adjust to that.
That's right. And I would add that the state of your heart, let the state of your heart be at a place where you wish goodwill on all your listeners, on your audience, and let that actually affect your body language. People have a sense of what you mean by your words, by actually observing your eyes, your facial expressions, your gestures, your posture, your movement. And we don't have to lie when we are totally truthful with how you believe. And when you believe that you are truly caring for that audience, you want to give them value, and you respect them and appreciate them, and you have that feeling, you don't have to know about 100 different cultures, but you will modify the way you speak, you will modify the way you look at them, and let that work for you. It is very difficult to learn other than learning from your heart. So that's the last message I would like to leave.
Angela, I just want to give one
Please.
one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we in these seminars we talk about so much that this is the right way, this is what you can do, this is what you shouldn't do. But one most important thing when you're with your audience is sometimes learning so many new things can really make you stressed out. What is the right thing and what is not? Be genuine and be who you are, and explain to your so I wave my hands quite a lot, and I do tell my audience that forgive me if this is offensive to someone, that I wave my hands. And so have a disclaimer before you start your speech or after your speech is done, and be genuine and speak from your heart, and people will love it. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Wise, Dilip, Christian, and Rashmi. Thanks so much for spending the time. Attendees, we are at time today. I truly appreciate the wisdom and perception from our panel today onto humor and body language. Thank you all too for joining us, and we will be sending a recording soon. Please do feel free to send to anyone you think would benefit from the insights we have heard today. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.